have some handouts first, so that will help. Okay. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Does everyone have one? Okay. So I usually start with the history of constellations, and it's called Family Constellations is how it originally is, and that's what Bert Hellinger calls it. The approach part is added just because it's a little easier to understand. And Bert Hellinger is a psychotherapist in Germany, and he started this, gosh, he's in his 80s now, so it must have been at least 30, 40 years ago. And when he used to be a priest, and how his interest in the family started was when he was a missionary in the Zulu tribe. So he went to the Zulu tribe, and then they taught him more than he could ever imagine. He's like, well, I don't even, these people don't need my information, I need theirs. And so it was really imparted how much they honored and cherished their ancestors. And that is a huge, huge tenet of this work. Is
We just started.
I'll move my stuff for you. So that's the huge tenet, is about the ancestry and looking back and going back and seeing where the healing needs to be done and see what patterns have come through the family system. And now that I can talk about family systems, so so psychologically, through those theories, I've done a lot of research, and people like Satir and Ruhl and Cantor and Moreno and Minuchin are all influenced. So it's a family reconstruction, family systems theory, psychodrama, family sculpting. All those things are very similar to this, but Family Constellations kind of has a couple extra oomphes to it, energetically and spiritually, which the psychological theories don't really cover, and they don't really care to know, it seemed like, in the research. There's also a Gestalt aspect to it, and transpersonal psychology. So there's a lot of consciousness, unconsciousness, conscience wrapped into all of this. And any questions so far? It's pretty simple, but complex at the same time. And if you have anything, please.
I think you're doing a great job.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, the foundations of all of this, I don't like to talk. The psychological theory is important because that's where we are at. But the foundations and the spirituality, which really attracted me to this work, are existential phenomenology, and one of Bert's main tenets is acknowledging what is. So often in the therapy room, we hear the story over and over and over again, and which is important to know, and how we were trained. Let's get the facts. Let's get, what's behind it. How are you feeling? What do you want to work on? All that kind of stuff. But in this, it's more geared towards the fact. And I found this so helpful when I was going through the first year of this training, where they really stressed, it's not about the story, it's not about the story. And I kept thinking, well, that's the history, that's the person's life. And really and truly, it is not about the story. And it's helped me so much as a therapist, because when someone starts a story, I can say, okay, I see that that's very important to you, but tell me the facts. Who did what? Who, and even down to the facts of who is your father? Who is your mother? What is your name? who are you in that respect?
And if I can give an example of
Yeah,
just the fact,
please.
just from my practice this morning, I'm working with a woman whose son ended his life in front of her. And this is very traumatic, of course, for her, and she's looping in the story. And one of the things that one of her friends told her would be very helpful for her is to just pretend that your son went away to college and is not home. And I said to her, no, but that's not the fact. The fact is that your son ended his life in front of you. That's what is. So that, I thought that was kind of an interesting example of how we try to distort reality and the facts to make ourselves feel better, but that's not what is.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just one example.
And I think that is one of the key things to get to the heart of the situation really quickly. And that's another thing that this modality does, is you go really quickly to what the issue is, what's going on, right to where they need to be. So it doesn't take 6 sessions of hearing the story 5 times and then finally, you know, it goes to the fact of, okay, tell me what is. The fact is that your son is no longer here. He died. And so I found that, you know, clients by the end of my sessions will be going, wow, I was in 3 years of therapy and we never got that deep. And I've heard this over and over and over again, and it's not anything really magical I'm doing. You know, it's that they're courageous enough to go there, first of all, and that there's a safe container of which they can do it. So that's the acknowledging what is and how important that is and how to stay out of the story.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I think sometimes people have to tell the story a bunch of times before they're ready to really see what the facts are.
Mm-hmm.
So do you kind of gauge?
I do gauge. I do gauge when I'm going to pull out the people, the figurines. No, they're not toys. Far from toys.
They look like toys.
They do look like toys, and I'll give you an example of that. I had a client who would tell me a story a lot, and I finally said, you know, because I got sick of hearing the story, to be honest, and I said, you know, you've been telling me this story a few times now, and I said, how about we get out of the loop? Would you like to get out of the loop a little bit? Just a little bit, and we'll only go as fast as you want to go, because it's about their tempo. It's not about me and my agenda at all. And so, and he said, and he's this big, like 6'5" guy, and he's like, all right. And I said, okay. So I pulled these out, and he's like, oh, look at those little people. And I said, mm-hmm. He's like, oh, they're so cute. They have colors on them. You know, I said, yeah. And so I said, okay, well, let's set up your issue. Let's set up your family. And as soon as and his issue was him and his father. And as soon as he set it up, he put the 2 figurines down. In fact, we were in this room. He put the 2 figurines down, and I said, and just sit there and see what comes up for you. And all of a sudden, about 30 seconds, his eyes got really big, and he threw himself backwards on the couch. And I said, oh, what's happening for you right now? And he's like, this is intense. I'm not sure I like these little people anymore. And and so that was one of the first ones I had ever done with a client, and that kind of just reinforced, oh yeah, see, okay, I know I'm doing this for a reason. This is so powerful. And so since then, he's gone to a workshop, and he's like diving in and out, you know, I mean, he's really, it kind of gets you get the bug, and that's
So
you
is
just
that,
run with it.
is that how it's similar to like the psychodrama that you were
Yes.
referring to? I can see
Mhm.
that visualization helping to guide.
Yeah, and then another way it's similar is that you can use real people, and you know, and that's even more powerful than the figurines because of the energetic component. But I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So the role of conscience, unconscious, and consciousness. Now this is the most challenging part of writing my dissertation and reading this. So I, with the help of my mentor, we developed these 2 diagrams to help explain it. And so you know, we know everyone has a conscience, right? We all have a conscience, we all have what's good, what's bad. And so does each family. So does each family and each family member. So when we put all those together, you know, we, because of our religion, our culture, our race, and help me out with this too, because it's so expansive. So really the conscience of the family is the belief system. It's where we come from. It's what we believe. It's why we think, you know, what we think. It's why we might have judgments against men, judgments against women. It's why we, you know, don't get along with some people and don't get along with other people. And
Racism.
Racism, prejudice, yes. And so what this, okay, and then I'll go over consciousness because I think that's the way to do it. So the consciousness is obviously when things kind of come to light and things, you have an awareness or you have, you know, an aha moment, like people like to say. And so the consciousness in this work, in family constellations, is considered the revealing of the soul. So you have your family conscience that's unconscious, because we go through life and we don't necessarily know. You know, we just have our life, we have our judgments, we have, you know, our issues and our challenges. And so doing family constellations really brings that out into the open. So it makes what's unconscious conscious. Then you can see the patterns, you can heal the patterns, and you can do something different with your life. Is there anything that you looked at?
I think you're doing great.
Okay. So, and as you can see from this diagram, there's a conscience for the family, for the local society, for nations, for the world and the universe. So it's all expansive. And let's see, make sure I'm following. Okay. So the next tenet of under consciousness and unconscious is the orders of love. And this is a very important tenet. This goes through everything. This is when you're, especially when you're first working, after you learn this and go through the training, I'm working with clients. These are 3 of the easiest things to look for, and they run through every family. So the first order of love is everyone has a right to belong. So everyone has a right to be in their family. Everyone has, you know, that right. And so when you're talking to a client or you're looking at a constellation that they have set up, you look for an exclusion. You look for the figurine that's far away from the rest of the family. You ask about, was there an aunt, was there an uncle, was there a grandfather that was excluded in some way? Did someone die early, you know, of an unnatural death? Did someone, and so those are the things you look for. And
Was a pregnancy terminated?
Right, a terminated pregnancy. So all those things like that, any exclusion that you could think of really, and more.
Right, and many families have excluded family members.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't talk to that person. They married an African American, and we don't deal with that. This person over here is gay, and we don't handle that, and we just don't ever talk about that person.
Right.
So
Or it's the client themselves.
excluded
Right.
often.
Like,
Absolutely.
I'm thinking of one in particular. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
And through that, when you see that the client has been excluded, you go back in the generations and see who else has been excluded. And then in order to help to heal that part, you bring whoever from past generations back into the family system.
And that's the thing that we often see, is that it does go back several generations.
Mhm.
Every mother and daughter had cut off communication, kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah,
It's kind of wild to see patterns in families, intergenerational.
It really is.
It's really, I mean, no one really thinks about it until you map it out.
It's
Like we
like
do a
big
genogram,
right?
Yeah.
and you're like, whoa, so this is
Yeah.
like 3D genogram.
Yeah.
It is,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It really is. And then the extra kick is, we can move them around and do some healings around them. So it's just not on this flat piece of paper going, oh shit, I'm screwed.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm screwed.
We'll bleep that out.
Will you beat that out?
We'll edit that one later.
So,
Everyone has a right to belong.
Yes, everyone has the right to belong. The next one is order of precedence. So the order of precedence means, you can see this, the order of precedence gets knocked out of order when there's parentification. When a child takes on the role of the husband or the wife, or either or. That's one of the most blatant. When, the oldest child wants to be in charge of everything and doesn't know their place and is trying to take control of the children and that kind of thing, the order of precedence. So, do you have another example? Okay. And so when you're working with the figurines or in a workshop, in order to heal that, everyone has to be put back in the right order. And there's a process. It's not that you just go, okay, here we are, we're all set up, we're happy. There's quite some layers that you have to go through. So order of precedence is the next one. That's pretty self-explanatory, I think, yeah. And then the last one is everyone has their own fate. Everyone has their own fate. So oftentimes, I know it was true for me, I'm the oldest in my family, and I have a little brother. And I would constantly tell my brother, try to control his life. And it wasn't until doing this work where I finally realized that on a deep soul level. I mean, I could intellectualize it. Yes, I'm bossing him around. Yes, his life should be better. Yes, he should do this and he should do that. And felt that I was allowed to tell him all those things. But through this work, and going to the depths of healing that you go to, I finally realized, wow, it's really none of my business. He has his own fate. He came into this world to fulfill something, and that's my belief, that he came into this world to fulfill something. And I have to let him be and let him go on his path. It's not for me to decide. And so, and parents sometimes try to do that with children and things like that. So those are the three really main, and you can see it, you can think back in your own families. Oh, check, 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 and you probably can think of 5 clients right now that you could go, oh yeah, at least one of 3. And so this work really helps to kind of ease all that pain and suffering, really. And that sense of responsibility. I have to fix everyone, which we as therapists often have.
Absolutely, and it's very respectful, I might
Extremely.
add, when you talk about allowing people their own fate and allowing yourself your own fate.
Right, it's empowering for them. And so I've talked a little bit about setting up this constellation, and when you do workshops with real human people, there's an important field that gets created, an energetic field, and it's called the knowing field. Bert calls it the knowing field. Sometimes it's called the family soul field. Some practitioners have different ways to explain it. But when you set up this container, even if Jolene and I were doing a constellation, as soon as she set that up, there would be a container there. There would be a soul field there. And from this knowing field, and there's been studies on it, Rupert Sheldrake, yeah. Rupert Sheldrake is a huge person. If you look him up online, huge, a morphogenetic field. And there was a study done with the monkeys. On one island, they started to eat sweet potatoes because they ran out of food. And 100 miles away in the other island, the exact same species started to eat sweet potatoes, and nobody could explain why.
And they didn't need to.
They didn't normally eat those.
The other example of the morphogenic field is just the idea of energy and bonds and connection with pets. And they've put video cameras near pets and track their movements as their owners start to come home. And as they're just a few miles away, the dogs start to get anxious, and there's a bond. They can tell that their owners are coming home before they're even in the driveway or making any noise, that kind of a thing. So, and that's the same thing that happens here when we think of a client, we close their case, and they call us the next day. Now, is that a coincidence, or is there some kind of a morphogenic energy field that's kind of connecting us in this process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in this knowing field, that's where the family conscience lies. generation after generation. And so the facilitator, that's where the information comes from. And it takes a lot of practice, but, and openness, to do so. But the knowing field is just that. It's where the knowing comes from. Even you standing in as a client, doing your own constellation, will get ahas. We'll get, oh, that's why. Oh, and we'll feel different things from this field. Or, wow, that must have happened to my grandparents, or something like that. And it's a phenomena, which is why this is
So it happens kind of on two levels. If you're actually in a workshop and you're standing in as a representative, which I just did for the past 4 days, there was one in particular that was very powerful for me where I was standing in for someone's father. And I'm a complete stranger to this person. Michaelene was the only person there that I knew. And so you kind of empty yourself and you kind of, in a way, try to channel the energy of that family member. And all of a sudden, I was standing there very neutrally. All of a sudden, my hands felt as if they were vibrating. And I had a very strong sensation in my hands, like fists. As it turned out, this gentleman was from South Africa, and his father was very physically violent. And I don't know if that's just a coincidence or what. I don't really think so, but it was very interesting how that fit his story. So it happens on that level, and then it also happens very frequently from what I'm reading and what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, that as people do their family constellations, and at the end, when they line them up, often there's a shift in their family. That there's one example that I read about, and I guess this happens frequently, this kind of thing where a guy marries